Hey, 8th graders, we're going to do two examples today. We're doing something very similar to yesterday. Today we're going to compare the size of numbers. So in order to do that, we need to take a few notes first. So we need to know these two signs. There is this sign, this sign. This sign means less than, and this sign means greater than. You always place the smaller number at the smaller end. So if I have the number 1, and I say that 1 is less than 3, I always have my smaller number towards the point. Same thing over here, I'd put 1 here. I could say that 3 is greater than 1. What we're going to do today is compare the size of these two quantities. So let's start with the square root of 10. Now, I know that I'm not going to get an exact answer for the square root of 10, but I can get a pretty close guess. I know that the square root of 10 falls in between the square root of 9 and the square root of 16. Now I want to look, is it closer to the 9 or closer to the 16? Well, square root of 10 is closer to 9, so I know that then it's going to be closer to 3 than it is to 4. I got 3 and 4 because the square root of 9 is 3, and the square root of 16 is 4. So it's going to be closer to 3. It's actually going to be really close to 3 because 10 is just one spot away from 9. So I can guess that the square root of 10 is approximately 3.1 or 3 and 1/10. I'll also accept 3 and 2/10. Alright, I need to do my next number. This is an improper fraction. I know it's improper because my numerator is larger than my denominator, but I know that I can take any fraction and make it into a decimal by dividing. So I'm going to put top in, bottom out. 7 divided by 2. Does 2 go into 7? Well, yes, it does. It goes in 3 times. 3 times 2 is 6. Subtract and we get 1. Now I can add a decimal and a 0. Bring it down. 2 goes into 10 5 times. I know that 7 halves is equal to exactly 3 and 5/10. So now I want to compare my two numbers. We said for the first one it was 3.1 or 3.2. We can take either of those numbers. Let's take 3.1, and I want to compare that with 3.5. Which number is larger? Well, 3 and 5/10 is larger because the 5 is larger than the 1 in the tenths place value. So I want to go back and look at my original two numbers. I had the square root of 10 and 7 halves. I know that the square root of 10 is equal to, so I know that my square root of 10 is less than 7 halves because 3.1 was less than 3.5. Here is my final answer. 8/10 is less than 7 halves. We're going to do one more example like this. Let's take a look at this next problem. I want to compare these two quantities, 7 and 1/4, and the square root of 61. I want to figure out about what value are each of these numbers, and I can do that best by putting them into decimals. So I'm going to start with the square root of 61. I know that the square root of 61 falls between two perfect squares. Those perfect squares are 64 and 49. Now I want to decide which one is 61 closer to. Is it closer to 64 or 49? Well, it's closer to the 64, so I know that it's going to be closer to 7. Closer to 7 or closer to 8? Well, because it's closer to 64, it should be closer to 8. A really good guess would probably be 7.8. Because it's pretty close to 64, it's not right next to it. It's not right in the middle, though, so I would guess 7 and 8/10. I'll write that down here. Cool, so now I want to know the value of 7 and 1/4. I want to turn this into a decimal. I see that I have a whole number and a fraction. So I'm going to keep my whole number the same and turn my fraction into a decimal. I can make this fraction into a decimal by doing top goes in, bottom goes out. 4 goes into 1. That doesn't happen. That's 0 times. I can add a decimal point and a 0 and put a decimal point up top. 4 goes into 10 2 times. 2 times 4 is 8. I will subtract and get 2. Add a 0, bring it down. 4 goes into 20 5 times. 5 times 4 gives me that 20, and 20 minus 20 is 0. So I know that I can rewrite 7 and 1/4. I can keep my 7 the same, and the 1/4 I can write as the decimal 0.25. So 7 and 1/4 is the same thing as 7.25. Now I know the approximate value of one of my numbers and the exact value of my other number. I can now compare these two numbers. Which is greater, 7 and 1/4 or the square root of 61? Well, I want to look at the tenths place value when I turn them into decimals. Which tenths place value is larger, the 2 or the 8? The 8 is larger, so that means that the square root of 61 is going to be larger than 7 and 1/4. And it's larger because I put this larger sign facing the square root of 61. And then reading my expression left to right, this is that 7 and 1/4 is less than the square root of 61. Here is my final answer. You have 4 problems to practice and in the back side of your worksheet. Good luck.